The Metro card reader beeped its rejection for the third time. Dorian Silvermane stared at the turnstile that separated him from the downtown 6 train, his hands shaking as he fumbled through empty pockets. Behind him, the evening rush-hour crowd pressed forward with increasing impatience. "Move it along, buddy," someone snapped. Dorian's chest tightened. 12 hours ago, he discovered his fiancée Vivian in bed with his brother Cashin in what was supposed to be their wedding venue's bridal suite. 12 hours ago, he'd walked out of his penthouse with nothing but the clothes on his back and his wallet, which he'd emptied buying drinks at the first dive bar he could find. Now he stood in Grand Central Terminal looking like any other down-on-his-luck New Yorker, his designer suit wrinkled and stained, his usually perfect hair disheveled. "Sir, you need to purchase a fare or step aside," the MTA attendant called from her booth. Heat flooded Dorian's face. The Silvermane name was worth $8 billion, and he couldn't afford a $2.75 subway ride. He'd left his credit cards behind in his fury, taking only cash that was long gone. "I've got this." A woman stepped up beside him, her Metro card already in hand. She was probably his age, maybe younger, with auburn hair escaping from a messy bun and scrubs that marked her as medical staff. Without waiting for his response, she swiped her card and pushed him gently through the turnstile. "Wait, I can't let you pay for." Dorian started, but she was already through behind him. "It's $2.75. I'm not going to miss rent over it." Her voice carried a slight southern accent, warm despite her matter-of-fact tone. "You look like you've had the kind of day where the universe owes you a break." They walked toward the platform together, carried by the flow of commuters. Dorian wanted to protest, to tell her he could pay her back 1,000 times over, but the words stuck in his throat. For the first time in his 30 years, someone had helped him without knowing who he was or what he was worth. "I'm Celeste," she said as they waited for the train. Dorian. The name felt strange on his tongue. How long since someone had asked his name without already knowing it? The train arrived with its familiar screech of brakes. They found seats near the back, the car moderately crowded but not packed. Celeste pulled out a worn paperback and began reading, giving him space to process whatever had brought him to this moment. Dorian studied her profile. She had the kind of face that photography would call interesting rather than classically beautiful. Strong features, laugh lines around her eyes, a small scar on her chin. Her hands were clean, but showed the wear of someone who worked with them. No manicure, no jewelry except small silver earrings that looked handmade. "Veterinary emergency clinic," she said without looking up from her book, apparently noticing his stare. "In case you were wondering about the scrubs. We had a dog come in tonight who'd been hit by a car. Touch and go for 3 hours, but he made it." "That's good. That he made it." Dorian's voice sounded rusty. "Are you okay?" Celeste closed her book and turned to face him fully. Her eyes were hazel, shifting between green and brown in the fluorescent light. "I don't mean to pry, but you look like someone who just watched his world end." The assessment was so accurate it knocked the breath out of him. Dorian found himself talking before he could stop himself. "I was supposed to get married tomorrow. 300 guests, orchestra, the works. This morning, I went to surprise my fiancée at the venue and found her with my brother." The words came out flat, emotionless. "Not just talking. In the bed where we were supposed to spend our wedding night." Celeste winced. "Jesus. I'm sorry. The thing is, I wasn't even surprised. Not really. I think I knew something was wrong, but I kept telling myself I was paranoid." Dorian laughed bitterly. "Turns out paranoia is just pattern recognition. How long were you together?" "For years. We've been engaged for 1." He rubbed his face with both hands. "My family's going to love this. The scandal, the humiliation, the money already spent on tomorrow's circus." The train lurched as it rounded a curve, and Celeste steadied herself with one hand on the seat. "Sounds like you dodged a bullet. Better to find out now than after you're legally tied to someone who doesn't respect you." "That's what I keep telling myself." Dorian looked at her directly. "Why did you help me back there? You don't know me from any other stranger in the city." Celeste shrugged. "My mom always said kindness costs nothing but is worth everything. Besides, we've all been there. Maybe not your exact situation, but that feeling of having the rug pulled out from under you." She paused. 3 years ago, I lost my job and my apartment in the same week. Had to move back in with my parents in Tennessee. This city can chew you up and spit you out, but it can also surprise you with moments of grace. Is that what this is? A moment of grace? Maybe. Celeste smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face. Or maybe it's just Tuesday night on the 6 train. The conductor announced the next stop, and Celeste gathered her things. "This is me," she said, standing. "Take care of yourself, Dorian. And for what it's worth, anyone who would cheat the day before their wedding doesn't deserve you." She disappeared into the crowd of departing passengers before he could respond. Dorian sat back in his seat, watching the tunnel walls blur past the window. For the first time since this morning, the crushing weight in his chest had lifted slightly. He didn't even know her last name. The West Village Animal Rescue occupied a converted warehouse that had seen better days. Celeste pushed through the front door carrying 2 bags of dog food, the familiar scent of disinfectant and wet fur greeting her. She'd been working here for 2 years, ever since Dr. Isadora Thorne had taken a chance on a veterinary nurse with more heart than experience. "Morning, sunshine," called Marcus, the weekend volunteer coordinator, from behind the front desk. "We've got a new volunteer starting today. Dr. Thorne wants you to show him the ropes." Celeste dropped the food bags near the supply closet. "Please tell me he's not another Upper East Side Trust Fund kid looking to pad his college application. See for yourself." Marcus nodded toward the kennels. "He's already back there." She made her way through the main corridor, past the cat rooms, and into the dog kennels. The morning light streamed through high windows, illuminating floating dust motes and the occasional escaped fur tuft. Most of the dogs were awake, some barking hopefully at her approach, others watching with the patient resignation of animals who'd learned not to expect much from humans. A man knelt in front of Brutus's kennel, speaking quietly to the pit bull mix who'd been surrendered 3 weeks ago. Brutus was one of their harder cases, reactive and skittish around most people, but he was sitting calmly, his tail making tentative wags. "That's impressive," Celeste said. "Brutus doesn't usually warm up to strangers." The man looked up, and Celeste felt a jolt of recognition that she couldn't quite place. He was tall, probably early 30s, with dark hair and blue-gray eyes that seemed familiar. Clean-shaven, wearing jeans and a simple gray t-shirt that looked expensive despite its simplicity. "Dogs can sense when someone understands what it's like to feel abandoned," he said, standing. "I'm Dorian Walsh." He extended his hand. Walsh, not the name that was dancing on the edge of her memory, but she shook his hand anyway. "Celeste Ravencroft. I'll be showing you around today." His handshake was firm, calloused in a way that surprised her. Most volunteers from Manhattan had soft hands and good intentions that lasted about 2 weeks. "Have we met before?" she asked. "You look familiar." Something flickered across his expression. "I don't think so. I'd remember." Celeste studied his face for another moment, then shrugged. New York was full of familiar strangers. "Let's start with the basics. We've got 42 dogs and 38 cats right now. Weekday volunteers usually handle feeding, cleaning, and socialization. Weekends we do adoption events." They moved through the kennels, Celeste explaining the routine while Dorian listened intently. He asked good questions, practical ones about feeding schedules and medication protocols. When they reached Luna, a 3-legged golden retriever who'd been hit by a car, he crouched down and let her sniff his hand through the chain link. "What's her story?" he asked. "Hit and run in Queens. The driver didn't stop, but a witness brought her in. We had to amputate, but she's adapted well. She's been here for months." For months. Dorian's voice carried an edge that surprised her. People want puppies or perfect dogs. Luna's 8 years old with a disability. Not exactly Instagram material. Celeste couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "But she's got more heart than most humans I know." Dorian was quiet for a long moment, watching Luna's tail wag hopefully. "What does it cost to run a place like this?" "More than we have. Dr. Thorne performs miracles with the budget, but we're always one emergency away from trouble." Celeste moved to the next kennel, where a young German shepherd mix paced anxiously. "This is Thor. Came in last week. His family had to give him up when they lost their apartment. How old? 2. House-trained. Good with kids. Knows basic commands. In a perfect world, he'd be adopted within days. But this isn't a perfect world. No, it's not." Celeste glanced at him sideways. His expression was thoughtful, almost calculating. "Most volunteers start asking about adoption fees and success rates. You're asking about costs and challenges. I believe in understanding problems before trying to solve them." They finished the tour in the cat rooms, where Dorian proved equally comfortable. The cats seemed to approve of him. which was unusual. Cats were pickier than dogs about human energy. Coffee? Celeste asked when they'd completed the circuit. There's a decent place around the corner. I'd like that. The Blue Note Cafe was busy but not crowded, filled with the usual mix of NYU students and neighborhood locals. They found a table by the window, and Celeste ordered her usual dark roast while Dorian asked for an espresso. "So what's your story?" she asked when the server left. "Most people who volunteer here are either veterinary students, retirees, or trying to impress someone. You don't fit any of those categories." Dorian smiled, and the expression made him look younger. "What category do I fit? I'm still figuring that out." Celeste leaned back in her chair. "You're comfortable around animals, you ask intelligent questions, and you're clearly not doing this for college credit. But there's something else. You look at the place like you're assessing it." "Maybe I am." "For what?" Their coffee arrived, giving Dorian a moment to consider his answer. "Let's say I'm someone who believes in supporting worthwhile causes. Dr. Thorne mentioned you need funding for a new medical wing." Celeste set down her cup carefully. "Are you talking about a donation?" "I'm talking about getting involved. This place does good work, but it could do more with the right resources." "How much more? What if money wasn't the limiting factor? What if you could help every animal that came through those doors, regardless of the cost of treatment?" The question hung between them, too large and too hopeful for Celeste to process immediately. She'd worked in animal rescue long enough to know that fairy godparents didn't exist, and strangers who showed up promising unlimited resources usually had complicated strings attached. "That's a nice dream," she said finally. "But dreams don't pay for surgery or buy medical equipment." "No, they don't. But the right kind of partnership could." Celeste studied his face, looking for the catch she knew had to be there. "What kind of partnership?" "The kind where someone with resources connects with people who know how to use them effectively." Dorian's expression was serious now, all traces of casual charm gone. "I've been looking for the right project, the right team. This morning convinced me I might have found it." "This morning? You've been there 3 hours." "Sometimes that's all it takes to recognize something worthwhile." The words resonated strangely, as if she'd heard them before in a different context. Celeste shook her head, trying to clear the feeling of déjà vu that had been nagging her since they'd met. "I should probably mention that we do background checks on major donors," she said. "I'd expect nothing less." Dorian finished his espresso and signaled for the check. "Should I plan to come in next weekend?" "If you're serious about volunteering, yes." "But Dorian." Celeste waited until he met her eyes. "Don't make promises you can't keep. These animals have been disappointed enough." Something passed across his face, gone too quickly for her to interpret. "I never make promises I can't keep." 2 weeks into his volunteer work, Dorian had established a routine. Arrive early Saturday mornings, stay through the afternoon adoption events, and find excuses to linger until Celeste finished her weekend shift. Today was no different, except that Dr. Thorne had asked them to work together on intake evaluations for 3 new arrivals. The first dog was easy enough, a young beagle mix who'd been surrendered when his elderly owner moved to assisted living. Healthy, friendly, adoptable within days. The second, a senior Labrador with hip dysplasia, would require ongoing medical management that made him a harder placement. The third case made Celeste's jaw tighten with anger. "Owner surrender," she read from the paperwork. "Says here the dog became too aggressive after they moved to a smaller apartment." She looked at the trembling German shepherd cowering in the corner of the exam room. "Look at him, Dorian. Does this look like an aggressive dog to you?" Dorian approached slowly, letting the dog sniff his hand. The animal was underweight, his coat dull, with the kind of fearful body language that spoke of neglect rather than aggression. "How old?" 7. "His name's Scout." Celeste's voice was tight, with controlled fury. "I see this constantly. People get puppies without thinking about the commitment, then blame the dog when their circumstances change. What happens to dogs like Scout? Depends. If we can rehabilitate his confidence and find the right home, he'll be fine. But older dogs with behavioral issues." She didn't finish the sentence. Dorian continued working with Scout, speaking in low, reassuring tones. Gradually, the dog's posture relaxed, his tail giving tentative wags. "He's not aggressive. He's scared." "I know that. You know that. But try explaining it to potential adopters who want to guarantee their dog will never have problems." Celeste pulled out her stethoscope. "This is why I left my job at the emergency clinic. At least here, when we save a life, it stays saved." What do you mean? Private practice means dealing with owners who'll pay $5,000 for cancer treatment for their poodle, but euthanize their pit bull mix for jumping on the couch. She listened to Scout's heart, her movements gentle despite her agitation. I grew up believing people were basically good. This work taught me that caring is a luxury not everyone can afford. There was something deeper in her voice, a bitterness that went beyond professional frustration. Dorian recognized it because he'd heard it in his own voice when he talked about his family's business practices. Sounds like you're speaking from experience. Celeste finished her examination and made notes on Scout's chart. My family learned that lesson the hard way. We had a small farm in Tennessee, been in our family for 3 generations. Nothing fancy, but it was ours. She paused, her pen hovering over the paperwork. When I was 16, my father got sick. Cancer. The treatments ate through our savings, and we had to take out loans against the farm to cover the medical bills. Dorian felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The loan company was helpful at first, very understanding about payment schedules. Then my father died, and suddenly the terms changed. Interest rates doubled overnight. Late fees appeared for payments that had been on time. When my mother tried to renegotiate, they told her the original agreement had been modified without her knowledge. That's illegal. Prove it. We hired a lawyer with what little we had left, but they had an army of attorneys and endless resources. The foreclosure took 18 months, long enough to drag out our hope and drain every penny we could scrape together. Celeste's voice was matter-of-fact now, but her knuckles were white where she gripped the pen. The worst part was watching my mother blame herself. She kept saying she should have read the fine print more carefully, should have understood the risks better. Dorian's throat felt tight. What happened to your family? Mom moved in with my aunt in Memphis. I was starting my senior year, so I finished high school living with friends. Used the life insurance money to pay for veterinary nursing school. She looked up from the chart. The company that bought our loan? Silvermane Financial Services. They turned our farm into a strip mall. The room seemed to tilt around Dorian. Silvermane Financial was a subsidiary of Silvermane Industries, the company his father had built and that he was supposed to inherit. He remembered the expansion into predatory lending, his arguments with his father about the ethics of targeting distressed properties. Those arguments had cost him his trust fund for 6 months when he was 22. I'm sorry, he managed, the words completely inadequate. It was a long time ago. Celeste's smile was forced. But it taught me that there are people in this world who see others' desperation as opportunity. That's why places like this matter. At least here, we're trying to save lives instead of profiting from misery. Scout had curled up next to Dorian's leg, finally relaxed enough to rest. The simple trust of the gesture felt like an accusation. Celeste, what if I told you that someone wanted to make a significant donation to the rescue? Enough to expand operations, maybe even buy the building next door? I'd ask what they wanted in return. Nobody gives away money without expecting something back. What if they didn't want anything? What if they just believed in the work you're doing here? Celeste studied his face carefully. I'd be suspicious. In my experience, people with that kind of money don't give it away without strings attached. And the strings are usually designed to benefit the donor more than the cause. Not everyone with money is like the people who took your farm, aren't they? Her voice was sharp. The system that allows someone to accumulate massive wealth is the same system that destroys families like mine. You can't participate in one without enabling the other. Dorian wanted to argue, to tell her that he'd fought against his family's practices, that he'd tried to change things from the inside. But how could he explain that without revealing who he was? And if he revealed his identity, would she see him as one of the people who destroyed her family? You don't think wealth can be used responsibly? I think wealth insulates people from the consequences of their choices. It's easy to be generous when generosity costs you nothing. Celeste closed Scout's file. But I've met plenty of people with good intentions and bad outcomes. They worked in silence for the rest of the evaluation, the easy companionship of the past 2 weeks replaced by an uncomfortable tension. Dorian found himself watching Celeste more carefully, noting the way her jaw tightened when she talked about Scout's previous owners, the protective gentleness in her hands as she handled the frightened dog. As they finished paperwork, Celeste's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and frowned. Problem? Dorian asked. Rent notice. My landlord's selling the building, and the new owners want to convert to luxury condos. I've got 60 days to find a new place. She shoved the phone back in her pocket. Welcome to New York, where helping animals pays just enough to afford a closet in Queens. How much do you need? The question came out before Dorian could stop himself. Celeste's expression shifted from frustrated to suspicious. Why would you ask that? I just meant, if you're looking for a roommate or something. I can handle my own problems, Dorian. I've been doing it for a long time. Her tone was final, the conversation clearly over. As they prepared to leave, Scout looked up at Dorian with trusting brown eyes, and the weight of his deception felt heavier than ever. He was falling for a woman who had every reason to hate everything he represented, and every day he didn't tell her the truth made the eventual revelation worse. But how could he tell her that he was the heir to the company that had destroyed her family's legacy? The storm hit Manhattan just as Celeste was finishing the evening medication rounds. Thunder rattled the windows of the rescue, and rain pounded against the glass with increasing intensity. Most of the animals had settled into nervous quiet, but a few of the more anxious dogs whimpered in their kennels. Looks like you're stuck here for a while, Dr. Thorne said, pulling on her raincoat. The subway's already reporting delays, and it's only going to get worse. I'm heading home before the roads flood. Celeste nodded, checking her phone. The weather alerts were ominous, with flash flood warnings across the city. I'll stay until it passes. Someone should be here anyway in case the power goes out. Dorian's still in the back office, isn't he? At least you won't be alone. That was both reassuring and problematic. Over the past week, since their conversation about Scout and her family's history, something had shifted between them. The easy friendship had developed an undercurrent of tension that made her acutely aware of his presence. She'd caught herself watching the way his hands moved when he worked with the animals, noticing how his voice changed when he thought no one was listening. Dr. Thorne left, and Celeste made another round through the kennels, speaking softly to the more frightened animals. The rescue felt different at night, quieter but somehow more alive. During the day, it was all business and efficiency. In the evening, with just the animals and the sound of rain, it felt like a sanctuary. She found Dorian in the break room, sitting at the small table with financial reports spread in front of him. He'd been staying late more often recently, always with some project or research that needed attention. Still working on the budget analysis? She asked. He looked up, and she noticed he looked tired, trying to understand the funding gaps. Dr. Thorne mentioned you're behind on the building payments. We're always behind on something. That's the reality of nonprofit work. Celeste poured herself coffee from the machine, offering him a cup. You don't have to solve all our problems, you know. Maybe I want to. The simple statement hung between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond financial planning. Celeste sat across from him, suddenly aware that they were alone in the building except for the animals. Why? She asked. You've been volunteering for 3 weeks. Most people get the warm, fuzzy feeling and move on to the next charity event. You think I'm here for the warm, fuzzy feeling? Lightning flashed outside, followed immediately by thunder that made them both glance toward the windows. The lights flickered but held. I think you're here for something, but I haven't figured out what yet. Celeste studied his face in the harsh fluorescent light. You're not like the other volunteers, Dorian. They're here because they love animals or want to help. You're here like you're searching for something. Maybe I am. What are you searching for? He was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table. Redemption, maybe. A way to balance the scales. What scales? Before he could answer, the lights went out completely, plunging them into darkness. Emergency lighting kicked in a few seconds later, bathing everything in a dim red glow that made the familiar space feel strange and intimate. Generator should start in a minute, Celeste said, but her voice sounded different in the near darkness. They sat in the red-tinged quiet, listening to the storm rage outside and the subtle sounds of animals stirring in their kennels. When Dorian spoke, his voice was lower, more honest than she'd heard it before. What if I told you I've spent my whole life watching people use power to hurt others? That I've been complicit in things I'm ashamed of? I'd say that's a starting point, not an ending point. What matters is what you do next. And if what I did next wasn't enough? If the damage was already done? Celeste leaned forward, trying to see his expression in the dim light. Are we still talking hypothetically? I don't know anymore. The generator rumbled to life, restoring partial power to the building. In the better lighting, she could see something vulnerable in his expression, as if he was fighting with himself about something important. Dorian, what aren't you telling me? He stood abruptly, moving to the window where rain streaked the glass like tears. There are things about me, about my family, that would change how you see me. Try me. I can't. Not yet. He turned back to her, and the look on his face made her heart race. But I need you to know that everything I've told you about caring about this place, about caring about you, that's real. The admission electrified the space between them. Celeste felt her breath catch as he moved closer. Caring about me? More than I should. More than I have any right to. She stood slowly, aware that they were crossing some invisible line. Who says you don't have the right? You would if you knew. Then don't tell me. Not tonight. The storm outside seemed to pause, as if the world was holding its breath. Dorian reached up to touch her face, his thumb tracing her cheek. This is a mistake. Probably. You'll hate me when you find out the truth. Maybe. But that's tomorrow's problem. He kissed her then, soft at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might disappear. When she kissed him back, her hands fisting in his shirt, the gentleness dissolved into something desperate and hungry. She tasted coffee and rain and something she couldn't name but wanted more of. They broke apart, breathing hard, foreheads touching in the dim light. Celeste felt dizzy, as if the storm had moved inside her chest. Celeste, I have to tell you something. About who I really am, about my family. A sharp knock on the front door cut through his words. They froze, listening. The knock came again, more insistent. Are you expecting anyone? Dorian asked, his voice tight. No, we're closed. But even as she said it, Celeste was moving toward the front of the building. Could be someone with an emergency animal. She peered through the glass door and saw a man in an expensive suit standing under a large umbrella, seemingly unbothered by the storm. Something about his appearance set off warning bells. Can I help you? She called through the door. I'm looking for someone. Dorian Silvermane. I was told he might be here. Celeste felt the world tilt. She turned to look at Dorian, whose face had gone completely white. Silvermane, she whispered. The man outside knocked again. Mr. Silvermane, I know you're in there. Your security detail tracked your phone. We need to talk. Everything clicked into place with horrible clarity. The familiar feeling when she'd first seen him. The expensive casual clothes. The way he assessed the rescue like he was calculating its worth. The questions about funding and costs. Dorian Silvermane, heir to Silvermane Industries. The company that had destroyed her family. Celeste, let me explain. But she was already backing away from him, her hand pressed to her mouth as if she could hold back the sick feeling rising in her throat. The man outside was still knocking, but all she could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat and the echo of Dorian's voice saying he cared about her while lying about everything else. The man at the door wasn't alone. As Celeste stared through the rain-streaked glass, a black sedan pulled up to the curb and a woman stepped out. Even in the storm, she moved with the kind of confident grace that spoke of money and power. Platinum blonde hair that somehow remained perfect despite the weather, a coat that probably cost more than Celeste's monthly salary. Who is that? Celeste asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dorian's face had gone from white to gray. Vivian. The woman approached the door with purposeful strides, dismissing the man with the umbrella with a wave of her hand. She knocked once, then produced a key card from her purse and swiped it against the electronic lock. The door clicked open. How does she have a key to our building? Celeste demanded. I can explain everything, Dorian said, but he sounded like a man watching his execution approach. Vivian Harlow stepped into the rescue's lobby, shaking rain from her coat. Up close, she was stunning in the way that expensive maintenance could achieve. Perfect makeup, perfect teeth, perfect everything except for the cold calculation in her green eyes. Hello, darling, she said to Dorian, her voice carrying a slight accent that suggested European finishing schools. You've been quite difficult to find. Vivian, what do you want? What I've always wanted. For you to come home and stop playing these ridiculous games. Her gaze shifted to Celeste, assessing her with the kind of clinical evaluation one might give livestock. Though I can see the appeal of your latest hobby. I'm not his hobby, Celeste said, finding her voice. Oh, sweetheart. Vivian's smile was razor-sharp. You have no idea what you are, do you? The detective who'd been at the door entered behind her, water dripping from his coat. He was older, gray-haired, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much and been paid to forget most of it. Mrs. Harlow, he said quietly, perhaps we should discuss this elsewhere. Nonsense, Collins. I think it's time everyone understood the situation. Vivian moved deeper into the lobby, her heels clicking against the tile floor. Dorian, introduce me to your little friend. Leave her out of this, Dorian said, stepping protectively in front of Celeste. Leave her out of it. Darling, she's been in it from the moment you decided to play dress-up and pretend to be a common volunteer. Vivian's laugh was like breaking glass. Did you really think I wouldn't find out about your little sanctuary and your new pet project? Celeste felt the pieces clicking together with sickening clarity. Pet project? Oh, this is delicious. She doesn't know, does she? Vivian clapped her hands together once. Collins, show her the photographs. The detective reluctantly pulled out a tablet, swiping through several images before handing it to Celeste. The photos showed Dorian entering and leaving the rescue, but they were taken from multiple angles and clearly dated back weeks. We've been watching you both for quite some time, Vivian explained. At first, I thought Dorian was just having some sort of breakdown after our little misunderstanding. But then I realized he was actually trying to, what's the phrase, slum it with the locals. Misunderstanding. Dorian's voice was sharp. You call sleeping with my brother a misunderstanding? Cashin was a momentary lapse in judgment. You know how persuasive he can be. Vivian waved dismissively. But that's ancient history. What matters now is that you've had your fun playing common, and it's time to come home. Celeste looked at the photos, then at Dorian, pieces of the puzzle forming a picture she didn't want to see. How long have you known about me? About my family? Celeste, I can explain. How long? Vivian answered for him. Oh, he's known all along, dear. Collins, show her the other file. The detective swiped to a different folder, revealing documents that made Celeste's blood run cold. Property records from her family's farm, court documents from the foreclosure, financial statements showing the transfer of the loan to Silvermane Financial Services. Your tragic little backstory was quite the draw for our hero here, Vivian continued. Nothing appeals to a guilt-ridden billionaire like a chance to save the poor little victim of his family's business practices. That's not true, Dorian said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Collins, what did our research show about Mr. Silvermane's pattern of charitable giving? The detective cleared his throat uncomfortably. Silvermane Industries has a history of targeting charitable causes related to situations where the company's subsidiaries have faced criticism. A school in Detroit after the housing developments. A clinic in Alabama after the environmental lawsuit. Public relations, Vivian added helpfully. Make a generous donation, get some positive press, and suddenly everyone forgets about the unpleasant business practices that funded the generosity. Celeste felt sick. Is that what this is? Damage control? No, Dorian said firmly. Celeste, you have to believe me. What happened between us, what's happening now, that's real. Real? Celeste's voice rose. What's real? The lies about your name? The lies about your background? Or maybe the part where you pretended to care about our funding problems while knowing your family destroyed mine? I do care about the funding problems. I wanted to help. With what? Guilt money? Celeste turned to Vivian. How much was he planning to donate? Enough to make himself feel better about what his company did to my family? Oh, much more than that, Vivian said. Dorian has a pathological need to fix things. The last girl he tried to save got a new house and a college fund. Very generous, considering her only tragedy was dating him. There was no other girl, Dorian said, but Vivian was already pulling out her phone. Sandra Martinez. Her family lost their restaurant when Silvermane Financial called in their loan early. Dorian dated her for 6 months and bought her a bakery in Phoenix. She showed Celeste a news article with photos. Before that, it was a teacher whose school was closed by budget cuts after Silvermane Real Estate bought the district's administrative building. Each revelation hit Celeste like a physical blow. How many of us have there been? You're not like them, Dorian said desperately. This is different. Different how? Because I kissed you back? Because I was stupid enough to believe you actually cared? I do care. More than you know. You've been lying to me since the moment we met. About your name, your life, your reasons for being here. How am I supposed to believe anything you say? Vivian moved closer, her presence poisonous in the small space. Because, darling, men like Dorian only know how to love tragedy. You represent everything his family has destroyed, which makes you irresistible to his savior complex. That's enough, Dorian snapped. Is it? Because from where I'm standing, It looks like you found another broken bird to fix. The only difference is this one actually matters to you, which makes it so much more delicious when she realizes what you really are. Celeste backed toward the door, her hands shaking. I can't do this. I can't be here. Celeste, wait. Let me explain everything. The whole truth. The truth. She turned back to him, tears streaming down her face. The truth is that you're exactly like every other rich person who thinks money can fix the damage they've done. The truth is that I was just another charity case to make you feel better about your family's business. That's not true. Then why didn't you tell me who you were? Why the fake name, the volunteer act? If your intentions were honest, why all the lies? Dorian opened his mouth, but no words came. In the silence, Vivian's satisfied smile was answer enough. Come on, darling, Vivian said to Dorian. You've had your fun with the common folk. Time to come home and discuss our wedding plans. We're not getting married, Vivian. That ended when I found you with Cashin. We'll see about that. Her voice carried a threat that made the air in the room feel dangerous. Collins has some very interesting photos from tonight. I'd hate for them to end up in the wrong hands. She moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Miss Ravencroft, you should know that the rescue's lease expires next month. My company just purchased the building. I do hope you find somewhere else for all these strays. The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving Celeste and Dorian alone with the sound of rain and the weight of everything that had just been destroyed. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Celeste stood by the door, her reflection ghost-like in the rain-streaked glass, while Dorian remained frozen near the break room table where they'd kissed less than an hour ago. The emergency lighting cast everything in harsh shadows, making the familiar space feel alien and cold. Say something, Dorian finally whispered. Celeste turned to face him, and the look in her eyes made him step back involuntarily. What do you want me to say? Thank you for the charity? Thank you for pretending to care about me while plotting to ease your family's guilty conscience? I wasn't plotting anything. When I first came here, I didn't even know you worked here. But you knew about me, about my family, about what your company did to us. Her voice was eerily calm, which somehow made it worse than screaming would have been. How long have you known, Dorian? How long have you been lying to my face? He ran his hands through his hair, looking suddenly older. I found out the second week. I had Collins run a background check. You had me investigated? The calm cracked slightly. I had to know who I was getting involved with. It's standard procedure for anyone in my position. Your position, right? Celeste laughed bitterly. The position of slumming billionaire looking for his next redemption project. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Because from where I'm standing, it looks exactly like what Vivian described. Rich boy feels bad about daddy's business practices, finds a convenient victim to save, and gets to feel like a hero while getting laid in the process. The accusation hit like a physical blow. You know that's not what happened between us. Do I? Because I thought I knew you, and it turns out everything you told me was a lie. Your name, your background, your reasons for being here. Why should I believe anything about your feelings is real? Dorian moved closer, and she held up a hand to stop him. Don't. Just don't touch me. Celeste, please. Let me explain how it really happened. Fine. Explain. Tell me how you discovered that poor little Celeste Ravencroft lost her family farm to your company and decided she'd make the perfect pet project. That's not how it happened. I came here because I needed to get away from my life, from Vivian, from all of it. The rescue was just someplace where no one would look for me. And it was just a coincidence that you ended up at the exact shelter where the daughter of one of your victims worked? Dorian's silence was answer enough. It wasn't a coincidence, Celeste said flatly. You sought me out. Collins suggested several charities where I could lay low. This was one of them. But I swear to you, I didn't know you worked here until after I met you. After you met me on the subway, you mean? That wasn't chance either, was it? What are you talking about? The night you couldn't pay for your ride. The night I helped you. Tell me that was real, at least. Dorian's expression shifted, and Celeste saw the answer before he spoke. I had been watching the shelter for a few days, trying to decide if it was the right place to volunteer. I saw you leaving one evening. You followed me. I wasn't planning to approach you. But when my card was declined and you helped me, it seemed like. He trailed off, apparently realizing how it sounded. Like what? Like fate? Like the universe giving you a sign that this was your chance to play savior? Celeste's voice was rising now, the careful control finally breaking. Jesus Christ, Dorian, you staged our entire relationship. No, the moment I met you, everything changed. My feelings for you, they're real. More real than anything I've ever felt. Your feelings? What about mine? What about the fact that I trusted you? That I told you about my family, about what losing the farm did to us, while you knew the whole time that your company was responsible? I wanted to tell you. I tried to tell you tonight. You tried to tell me? When? Before or after you kissed me? Before or after you let me believe that you actually cared about me as a person instead of as a tax write-off? You're not a tax write-off. You're... Dorian struggled for words. You're the first person who's ever looked at me and seen something worth saving. Stop. Just stop. Celeste pressed her hands to her temples. Do you hear yourself? Even now, you're making this about you. About your need to be saved, your guilt, your redemption. What about me? What about what I needed? What do you need? Tell me, and I'll make it happen. I needed honesty. I needed someone who cared about me for who I am, not for who I represent in your personal guilt narrative. She looked at him with something that might have been pity. But you can't give me that, can you? Because you don't even know who I am. You only know the story you created about me. That's not true, isn't it? What do you know about me that isn't connected to my family's tragedy? What did you care about before you found out I was the perfect victim for your savior complex? Dorian opened his mouth, then closed it again. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. That's what I thought. Celeste moved toward the kennels. I need to check on the animals. When I come back, I want you gone. Celeste, we can work through this. I know I made mistakes, but what we have is based on lies. Everything you told me, everything you made me feel, it was all built on deception. She stopped in the doorway, not turning around. And now Vivian owns our building. Convenient timing, don't you think? I had nothing to do with that. How am I supposed to believe you? How am I supposed to trust anything you say when you've been lying to me since the moment we met? Because you know me. You know who I am when I'm with you. Celeste finally turned, and the pain in her eyes was devastating. I don't know you at all. The man I thought I was falling for doesn't exist. He was just another lie in your collection. She disappeared into the kennels, leaving Dorian alone with the sound of rain and the weight of his choices. He stood there for several minutes, listening to her voice as she spoke softly to the animals, the same gentle tone she'd used with him before she knew who he really was. When she returned, her face was composed, professional. I meant what I said. I want you gone. What about the rescue? The funding you need? We'll figure it out. We always do. Her voice was steady now, final. We don't need your guilt money. It's not guilt money. Yes, it is. It's always been guilt money. The only difference is I was too stupid to see it. She held out her hand. Your volunteer badge. Dorian unclipped the laminated card from his shirt and placed it in her palm, careful not to touch her fingers. This isn't over. Yes, it is. Celeste's voice was calm, certain. Goodbye, Dorian. Please don't come back. He wanted to say more, to fight for what they'd had, but the look in her eyes told him there was nothing left to fight for. Whatever trust had existed between them was gone, shattered as completely as if it had never been real at all. Outside, the storm was beginning to clear. Dorian walked to his car through the lessening rain, each step taking him further from the only place where he'd ever felt like himself. By the time he reached the street, his phone was already buzzing with messages from his assistant, his lawyers, his family. The real world was calling him back, just as Vivian had known it would. He looked back at the rescue one last time, seeing Celeste's silhouette moving past the windows as she completed her evening rounds. Then he got in his car and drove back to a life that felt emptier than ever, knowing that the best thing that had ever happened to him was something he'd destroyed with his own hands. The man who'd kissed Celeste Ravencroft in the emergency lighting was gone, replaced once again by Dorian Silvermane, heir to a fortune built on other people's losses. And this time, he had no one to blame but himself. 3 weeks had passed since Dorian walked out of the rescue, and Celeste had thrown herself into work with the kind of desperate energy that came from trying not to think. Dr. Thorne watched her with increasing concern as she took on extra shifts, stayed late every night, and volunteered for the most difficult cases. You're going to burn out, Dr. Thorne said, finding Celeste in the office at 7 in the morning, already deep into paperwork for their emergency relocation efforts. I'm fine. You're not fine. You're running on caffeine and stubbornness, and it's not sustainable. The older woman sat down across from her. Have you heard anything more about the building sale? Celeste's jaw tightened. Vivian's company made it official yesterday. We have 30 days to vacate. And the new location? Still looking. The places we can afford are either too small or in areas where we can't get city permits for animal housing. Celeste rubbed her eyes, which burned from lack of sleep. We might have to split up, send some animals to other rescues upstate. That's not what anyone wants. What anyone wants and what we can afford are two different things. Celeste's voice carried the bitter edge that had become familiar over the past weeks. Story of our lives, right? Dr. Thorne was quiet for a moment, studying Celeste's face. I got a call yesterday from Marcus Webb. He used to work in the legal department at Silvermane Industries. Celeste looked up sharply. Why would he call you? He's been following the news about our building situation. Apparently, he has some information he thinks we should see. I don't want anything from anyone connected to that company. Celeste, I think you should hear what he has to say. It's about Dorian. I don't want to hear about Dorian either. What if what you think you know about him is wrong? The question hung in the air between them. Celeste wanted to dismiss it, to maintain the anger that had been sustaining her for 3 weeks, but something in Dr. Thorne's tone made her pause. What do you mean? Marcus is coming in this afternoon. Will you at least listen to what he has to say? Marcus Webb arrived at 2 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had seen better days. He was in his 50s, with the careful posture of someone who'd spent years navigating corporate politics and the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much. Dr. Thorne, he said, shaking hands. Thank you for agreeing to see me. This is Celeste Ravencroft, Dr. Thorne said. The one I told you about. Marcus's expression softened. Miss Ravencroft, I'm sorry about what happened to your family. The Tennessee foreclosure was one of the cases that made me decide to leave the company. You worked on our case? Not directly, but I was in the legal department when the complaints started coming in. Your family wasn't the only one. Marcus sat down heavily. That's actually why I'm here. There are things about Dorian Silvermane that the public doesn't know. Things that might change how you see the situation. Celeste crossed her arms. I doubt that. Did you know that Dorian was cut off from his trust fund for 6 months when he was 22? No. Marcus opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. It happened after he tried to blow the whistle on Silvermane Financial's predatory lending practices. He discovered what the subsidiary was doing to distressed property owners and went directly to the board of directors. What happened? His father threatened to disinherit him completely if he didn't drop the investigation. When Dorian refused, Richard Silvermane had him removed from all corporate positions and froze his access to family funds. Marcus pulled out a document. This is the internal memo from the legal department. Dorian was considered a hostile actor within his own family's company. Celeste took the document, scanning the corporate language that described Dorian as acting against family interests and jeopardizing company stability. He fought them for 8 months, Marcus continued. During that time, he was living on savings and working with a non-profit legal clinic to build a case against Silvermane Financial. The only reason he stopped was because his mother had a heart attack, and the family convinced him that the stress of his investigation was killing her. But he went back to the company, with conditions. He negotiated partial autonomy over charitable giving and managed to redirect millions in company funds toward restitution programs. It wasn't enough to undo all the damage, but it was something. Marcus handed her another file. These are the programs he established. Low-income housing initiatives, small business recovery funds, educational scholarships for families affected by foreclosures. Celeste flipped through the documents, seeing program after program designed to help people in situations exactly like her family's. Why are you telling me this? Because I think you deserve to know that Dorian Silvermane is not his father. He spent the last 8 years trying to fix the damage the company has done, often at significant personal cost. Then why didn't he tell me any of this himself? Marcus looked uncomfortable. I can't speak to his personal motivations, but I can tell you that he's been discreet about his reform efforts because his father still controls the company. Too much public attention to Dorian's charity work tends to result in those programs getting quietly defunded. Dr. Thorne leaned forward. Marcus, what about our building situation? Do you know anything about Vivian Harlow's involvement? That's the other thing I wanted to discuss. Marcus pulled out his phone scrolling through emails. I still have contacts at the company. Word is that Vivian orchestrated the building purchase specifically to put pressure on this place. She knew Dorian had been volunteering here. Pressure for what? To force him back into line. She's been trying to manipulate him into resuming their engagement, and she saw his involvement here as a threat to that plan. Celeste felt something cold settle in her stomach. So she destroyed our shelter to get back at him? It appears so, but there's something else you should know. Marcus hesitated. There's been anonymous activity around your relocation efforts. Someone's been quietly buying up available properties and offering them to animal rescue organizations at below market rates. What do you mean? 3 buildings in Brooklyn, 2 in Queens. All purchased by shell companies and immediately listed as available for nonprofit use. The terms are incredibly favorable. Almost like someone was trying to create options for a specific organization that might need to relocate quickly. Dr. Thorne and Celeste exchanged glances. Do you know who's behind it? Officially? No. But the shell companies all trace back to a trust that was established 8 years ago specifically for animal welfare initiatives. Marcus closed his briefcase. I'll let you draw your own conclusions. After Marcus left, Celeste sat in the office staring at the documents spread across the desk. Everything she thought she knew about Dorian was shifting, reforming into a picture that was more complex and more painful than the simple narrative of wealthy guilt she'd constructed. He tried to tell me, she said finally. That night, before Vivian arrived. He said there were things about his family that would change how I saw him. But you didn't let him explain. I was so angry, so hurt. I felt like such a fool for trusting him. Celeste picked up one of the documents, a proposal for expanded restitution programs that bore Dorian's signature. What if I was wrong about everything? What if you were right about the things that matter? Dr. Thorne asked gently. About how he feels about you, about this place. How can I know what's real and what's guilt? Maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe the question is whether his reasons matter less than his actions. That evening, Celeste walked through the kennels, thinking about Marcus's revelations. Scout, the German shepherd who'd been surrendered for being too aggressive, pressed against the front of his kennel when she approached. He'd been adopted the week before by a family who understood that fear and aggression often looked the same in animals who'd been abandoned. She thought about second chances, about the difference between someone's worst moment and their true character, about the complexity of guilt and redemption, and whether good intentions could transform selfish motivations into something worthwhile. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Property at 847 Atlantic Avenue available for immediate lease. Terms negotiable for qualified nonprofit. Contact Brighton Property Management for details. Another option, another mysteriously favorable opportunity appearing just when they needed it most. Celeste stared at the message, her heart racing as she realized that even after everything that had happened between them, Dorian was still trying to save the things she cared about. The question was whether it was too late to save what they'd had together. Celeste stood outside the Silvermane Industries building at 11 o'clock at night, rain misting her face as she stared up at the glass tower that stretched into the darkness above. Security guards moved behind the lobby windows, but the upper floors were mostly dark except for a few scattered lights. She'd spent 2 days thinking about Marcus Webb's revelations, about the anonymous building purchases, about 8 years of quiet restitution that Dorian had never mentioned. 2 days of realizing that everything she'd accused him of being might have been wrong. The security guard at the front desk looked skeptical when she asked to see Dorian, but after a phone call, he directed her to the express elevator that would take her to the executive floors. 47th floor, he said. Mr. Silvermane is expecting you. The elevator ride felt endless. Celeste caught her reflection in the polished steel doors and almost laughed at the irony. 3 weeks ago, she'd thrown Dorian out of the rescue for lying about who he was. Now she was coming to him in his own territory, seeking the truth she'd refused to hear. The elevator opened onto a reception area that screamed wealth and power. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Manhattan that must have cost millions to secure. But the space felt cold, impersonal, nothing like the man she'd fallen in love with. Miss Ravencroft. She turned to find Dorian standing in the doorway of what appeared to be a corner office. He looked exhausted, older somehow, wearing a suit that fit perfectly but seemed to hang on him like he'd lost weight. His eyes held a wariness that broke her heart. I heard about the building options, she said without preamble. Atlantic Avenue, the place in Park Slope, the warehouse in Red Hook. All purchased by anonymous shell companies that just happen to be perfect for animal rescue operations. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. Not again. I've had enough lies to last a lifetime. Dorian's shoulders sagged slightly. Then why are you here? Because Marcus Webb came to see me. He told me things about you, about what you tried to do 8 years ago, about the programs you've been running. Celeste stepped closer. He told me about the trust fund you established for animal welfare initiatives. Marcus should mind his own business. Should he? Because it sounds like someone needed to tell your story since you were too stubborn or too proud to tell it yourself. They stood facing each other across the reception area, the distance between them feeling both vast and insignificant. Outside, the city sparkled in the darkness, millions of lives playing out their own dramas while theirs hung in the balance. I'm leaving tomorrow, Dorian said finally. There's a position with a conservation group in Costa Rica. Field work, far away from all of this. Running away again? Starting over. There's a difference. Is there? Because it looks like you're doing what you did after you found Vivian with your brother. Disappearing when things get complicated instead of fighting for what matters. Fighting for what matters. Dorian's voice carried an edge. I told you the truth about my feelings, and you threw it back in my face. What exactly am I supposed to fight for? Us. What we had before everything went to hell. What we had was built on deception. You said so yourself. Celeste moved closer, close enough to see the pain in his eyes that matched her own. I was wrong. I was hurt and angry, and I said things I didn't mean. You meant them at the time. Yes, I did. Because I thought you were just another rich guy trying to buy his way out of guilt. But you're not, are you? Dorian was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if he was fighting with himself about how much to reveal. The day I met you on the subway, he said finally, I just walked out of a meeting with my father. He'd told me that if I didn't stop interfering with company operations, he'd shut down every charitable program I'd established. 8 years of work, millions of dollars in aid, gone because I couldn't keep my mouth shut about ethics. What did you do? I told him he could keep his blood money, that I was done trying to fix a system that was designed to hurt people. Dorian moved to the windows, staring out at the city. I was walking to my lawyer's office to sign papers dissolving my trust fund when my card got declined at the subway. Everything I'd built, every way I'd tried to make amends, it was all disappearing. And then I paid your fare. And then you paid my fare. This stranger who had no reason to help me, who didn't know what I was worth or what I could do for her, just helped because it was the right thing to do. He turned back to her. Do you know how long it had been since someone had done something for me without wanting something in return? Dorian, when I found out about your family, about what Silvermane Financial had done to you, I wanted to tell you immediately. But I was terrified that you'd see me the way you eventually did, as just another guilty rich person trying to buy redemption. But you weren't buying redemption. You were earning it. Was I? Because it felt like I was falling in love with someone who represented everything I'd failed to protect. The admission hung between them, raw and honest in a way that cut through weeks of anger and misunderstanding. You didn't fail to protect me, Celeste said softly. You couldn't have stopped what happened to my family. You were barely out of college. I could have tried harder, could have fought my father longer. And maybe your mother would have died from the stress. Maybe those 8 years of programs you established wouldn't have existed. Maybe hundreds of families would have been worse off. Dorian looked at her with something that might have been hope. Do you really believe that? I believe that perfect is the enemy of good. I believe that you've spent 8 years trying to fix things that weren't entirely your fault to begin with. Celeste moved closer. And I believe that I was an idiot to push away the best thing that ever happened to me because I was too scared to trust it. Celeste, I love you, she said, the words coming out in a rush. Not because you're rich, not because you can solve my problems, but because of who you are when you're kneeling next to a scared dog or staying late to help with paperwork. Because you care more about doing the right thing than doing the easy thing. Even if the right thing is complicated and messy and doesn't fix everything, especially then. Dorian crossed the space between them in 2 quick steps, his hands framing her face. I love you too, so much that it terrifies me. Good. Love should be terrifying. If it's not worth the risk. He kissed her then, desperate and hungry and full of 3 weeks of separation and misunderstanding. When they broke apart, both breathing hard. Celeste could taste salt and realized one of them was crying. "Don't go to Costa Rica," she whispered against his lips. "What about the rescue? Vivian's building purchase? We'll figure it out. Together this time, with full disclosure and no more secrets." "Together," Dorian repeated, as if testing the word. "I like the sound of that." "Good, because I have a proposal for you. There's this animal rescue that needs a partner, someone who understands both business and the mission. Someone who's willing to work without salary and doesn't mind cleaning kennels." Sounds like a terrible deal for the partner. It is. Long hours, constant stress, never enough money, and a boss who's been told she's difficult to work with. "When do I start?" Celeste smiled, the first real smile she'd managed in 3 weeks. "How about tomorrow? I hear there's a conservation position in Costa Rica that just became available." Outside, the storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke, rain streaming down the windows as they held each other in the artificial light of the corporate tower. But for the first time since that night in the rescue, the future felt possible again. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And sometimes, Celeste thought as Dorian's arms tightened around her, real was enough.